In the heavens high, where the light does run, stand 4 archangels, their powers as one. Sariel of tornado, fierce winds at his call. Tamriel of the ocean, where the deep waters fall. Ludosil of flash, swift as the night's end. And Mal of sun, with light to defend. Together they reign, a radiant band, creating domains with a wave of their hand. The graces combined, a force to behold. In battles of light, their stories are told. These mighty 4, with power so grand, guardians eternal of the celestial land. Or are they in the ancient realm where light and darkness waged eternal war? The 4 archangels stood as the ultimate defenders of the heavens. Among them was Mal, the archangel of sun, whose brilliance could outshine the stars. His strength was a beacon of hope for the goddess clan, and his presence was a constant thorn in the side of the demon clan. But even in a world of divine beings, treachery lurked in the shadows. Galder, a puppet master whose magic could bend reality itself, wove a plan to shatter the celestial harmony. With his enchanting powers, Galder planted a seed of deceit in the minds of gods and mortals alike. One fateful day, as the skies darkened with the impending clash, Mal found himself face to face with Meliodas, the demon prince. The battlefield trembled under the weight of their power. Mal, Meliodas called out, his voice carrying a mix of respect and determination, this war needs to end, but it won't be in your favor. Mal's eyes blazed with the intensity of the sun. Meliodas, you know nothing of balance. The light will always prevail over darkness. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying as their powers collided. Mal summoned the searing light of the sun, bathing the battlefield in its brilliance. Meliodas countered with a torrent of darkness, the air thick with the raw energy of their clash. You think your light can burn away everything? Meliodas grunted, pushing against Mal's overwhelming power. But darkness has a way of consuming even the brightest flames. Mal roared, unleashing a blinding wave of energy. Your darkness will never overshadow the sun. Despite Mal's immense power, Meliodas fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast. Their battle raged on, devastating the landscape, until finally, with a swift and calculated strike, Meliodas pierced through Mal's defenses. Mal staggered, his radiant form dimming as he fell to his knees. You cannot extinguish the light, he whispered, his voice fading like the setting sun. Meliodas stood over him, his expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. I take no joy in this, Mal. This war has taken too much from us all. With a final, echoing cry, Mal's light flickered out, and the battlefield was left in eerie silence. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Galder's plan was unfolding. He conjured an illusion so convincing that it rewrote the annals of history. In this fabricated reality, it was not Meliodas who defeated Mal, but Esterossa, a powerful demon. The world now believed Esterossa had slain Mal in a brutal confrontation, tipping the scales of the celestial war. The goddess clan, driven by despair and fear, sought a way to end the conflict once and for all. Galder whispered another suggestion into their hearts, a solution steeped in sacrifice. The coffin of eternal darkness, a forbidden relic, could seal away the demon clan, but the price was steep. To wield its power, the goddesses would have to forsake their physical forms, sacrificing their earthly presence to ensure the demons' imprisonment. Desperate to protect their realm and avenge their fallen comrade, the goddesses agreed. In a solemn ceremony, they chanted the incantations, channeling the divine essence into the coffin. May our sacrifice bring peace to this world, one of the goddesses whispered, her voice filled with both sorrow and hope. As the ritual reached its peak, their bodies dissolved into pure light, leaving only their spiritual forms to wander the ethereal plane. The coffin of eternal darkness, now brimming with divine power, locked the demon clan in an unbreakable prison. The heavens wept for the loss of their radiant defenders, and the world entered an uneasy peace. Yet, beneath the surface of this victory lay the seeds of uncertainty. Galder's manipulation had left scars on the fabric of reality, and the truth of Mal's fate remained hidden in the shadows of the past. As the celestial realms mourned and the demons languished in their confinement, the echoes of this betrayal would one day resurface, altering the course of destiny once more. Subaru's breath caught, and he realized, too late, the mistake he had made. Panic gripped him as Felt's sharp eyes caught his hesitation, and the edges of her lips curled into a smug, knowing grin. So, the woman who hired me didn't want to say anything either, she began, her voice dripping with amusement. And it looks like you're just as bad. Subaru scrambled for a response, trying to plaster on a casual air, but his silence betrayed him. Felt leaned in, her crimson eyes gleaming with cat-like cruelty as she pressed her advantage. What is this insignia, anyway? It's worth more than it looks, right? That's why you're so desperate to get it. But let me guess, It's worth more than 20 holy gold coins, isn't it? She smirked. You're just another shady client trying to outbid the last. Her words struck like daggers. Subaru fought to keep his composure, his mind racing for a way out. Felt, just take the deal. 20 holy gold coins, it's the best you're going to get. Trust me, even the person who hired you can't offer more. Felt's eyes narrowed. And why do you know that? Subaru froze. His slip-up had exposed him. He stammered, but it was too late. Her suspicion deepened. You know her, don't you? Felt accused, her voice sharp and cutting. You're not just some clueless buyer. Spill it. Subaru hesitated, the weight of return by death looming over him like a phantom. He couldn't explain, couldn't tell her the truth. His silence only fueled her frustration. You're pathetic, she spat, crossing her arms. I'll give you one last chance. Tell me why you want the insignia. Give me the truth, or this deal is over. He met her gaze, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. Then, he bowed his head, his voice steady but soft. I want to return it. That's all. It belongs to someone who saved my life. I owe her that much. Felt's lips parted, her eyes widening slightly at the unexpected sincerity in his words. But just as quickly, her expression hardened again. That's absurd. If it's hers, why not just bring a guard to arrest me? Why pay so much for a stolen trinket? Subaru clenched his fists. Because she doesn't want guards involved. She's complicated. Silence hung heavy in the air. Rom, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke. Felt, I don't think the kid's lying. Don't be stupid, old man, she snapped. You can't seriously believe him. Their argument was cut short by a knock at the door. Rom's expression darkened as he turned to Felt. Your client. Maybe, Felt said, hesitating. But it's too early. As she approached the door, Subaru's stomach twisted. A terrible realization struck him. He bolted upright, shouting, Don't open it. We'll be killed. The door creaked open, and in walked a silver-haired girl with an icy expression. Subaru's heart sank. Not Sattler. The icicles crisscrossed mercilessly, filling the room with a white mist and covering the black-cloaked figure in freezing wind. The speed of these icicles was far beyond what he'd seen in the alley. As far as Subaru knew, this had transcended the major league and had reached a level of speed you only saw in video games. Their sharp tips would easily pierce through the human body and come out red with fresh blood. There were about 20 of them. If they landed, it'd mean certain death. But is she finished? Right, there's a bad flag. Even though he had remained silent for so long, the baldy just had to go and say something at the worst possible time. And as if to answer Subaru's shout, I was prepared, you see. I quite dislike its weight, but it was the right decision to wear it. Cutting through the white smoke, Elsa dashed forward with her black hair dancing behind her. As she brandished her cookery knife and nimbly advanced, there was no sign of injury on her body. She had cast aside her cloak and was now only wearing the form-fitting black clothes she wore underneath it, but there was no change besides this. Don't tell me it's the sort of thing where you take off weighted clothing and become faster. That would be pretty interesting, but the reality is simpler. My cloak had a spell woven into it that could negate magic just once. Seems it allowed me to keep my life. Elsa politely answered Subaru's query, and then swung her blade forward from a low stance. Standing in her path was not Sattler, who had just unleashed that huge attack. The blade's path was true, intended to plunge the heavy tip into her chest. Subaru was about to scream, but before that could happen. You do well not to underestimate a user of the spirit arts. We're rather frightening when you make enemies of us. A multi-layered shield device easily stopped Elsa's blade. Not Sattler placed her hands together before her chest. She had probably formed that shield using her hands. With her attack blocked, Elsa immediately backflipped away. A number of slightly smaller icicles were rapidly fired in pursuit and pierced the ground. This was Puck's attack. He floated by Not Sattler's silver hair as he waved his arms like he was conducting an orchestra. They're splitting the roles of offense and defense. It's really 2-on-1. That's what makes spirit uses dangerous. One handles offense while the other handles defense. Depending on the situation, you'll have one stall with simple magic while the other prepares a powerful move. They can do that sort of thing. On the battlefield, it is commonly said that, if you encounter a spirit user, you should drop your weapon and wallet and run. As Subaru looked on in admiration, Rom, who was next to him, muttered gravely as he tightened his grip on his club. Subaru nodded at his words. Indeed, in a one-on-one battle their advantage was absolute. Overcoming it would be no easy feat. By the way, what are you planning to do, old man? I'll look for an opening to help the elf girl. She seems more reasonable than the other one. Wait. Don't try it. You'd only be a burden. You'll just have your right arm and throat ripped apart if you go, so stay right there. Don't be that specific. It almost feels like that actually happened. He had actually seen this happen twice. As a result, his statement felt genuine. Rom seemed rather displeased as he clutched his arm and neck as if he felt himself getting cut down in another dimension. Even as they had this exchange, the battle continued. Although Subaru had warned Rom with his frivolous talk, in truth there were no openings to interfere in the battle. Countless lumps of ice formed one after another and were blasted all over the room. Their sizes varied. The larger ones were about the size of a head, and the smaller ones were roughly fist-sized. They were all fired with the speed of a full power pitch, and it was clear just how dangerous they were. However, even as she was surrounded by all of this ice, Elsa's movements now that she had lost her magic-negating cloak had transcended the realm of common sense. She would twist her body, lower herself to the ground as if crawling, and occasionally even defy gravity by running the walls. If she judged that even this wouldn't suffice, she would strike the ice with her blade, shattering the white crystals. She matched quantity with overwhelming quality. Her skill was exceptional. You handle yourself well for a girl. Even Puck had to admire her combat sense that could only be described as godlike. His mutter caused Elsa to smile broadly even in the midst of that chaotic battle. Oh my, it's been quite a while since I was last regarded as a simple girl. Most of my opponents might as well be babies from my perspective. But even so, you're so strong it's almost pitiful. It's quite the honor to receive praise from a spirit. Genuinely delighted this compliment, she swept away the ice surrounding her with her blade. He must have fired close to 100 by now, but besides that first bombardment not a single one connected. Puck was pressuring her with the sheer quantity of his offense, but he was unable to land a decisive blow. At this rate, won't they run out of MP and lose? As he pictured a reversal in offense and defense, Subaru pointed out that a lengthy battle would prove disadvantageous. However, Rom shook his head. I don't know what this MP is, but there's no need to worry about a spirit user running out of mana in battle. No need to worry about them running out of mana. Unlike magic users, spirit users do not use the mana within them, but rather the mana around them. Unless the world itself runs dry, a spirit user will never run out of mana. They've got unlimited gasoline so they can rev their engines as much as they please, huh? Quite a cheat. Rom cocked his head. Subaru's response was completely incomprehensible to him. He then continued with his head still tilted, but there's also the matter of how long the spirit can remain corporeal. Once the spirit is gone, the situation might change drastically. Crap, that's right, it's almost 5, isn't it? In the first world, Puck went to sleep not long after sunset. It hadn't been that long since the fight started, but surely throwing around that much magic must have been a significant drain on his mana reserves or whatever. Subaru's worries. This is bad. I'm getting a little drowsy. Actually, I was fighting in my sleep just now. Hey, Puck, get it together. I'm up, I'm awake, I'm definitely not sleeping. His voice is so low, isn't that conversation super concerning? Seemed to be right on the mark. Puck seemed to be nodding off already, and he could see that Not Sattler, who had Puck on her shoulder, was also starting to look anxious. Just when it was getting good. You're not even paying attention, how cold. That's the problem with being a popular guy. The girls just won't let you sleep. But staying up too late is terrible for your skin, you know. Bending her knees slightly, Elsa prepared to leap. Anticipating this, Puck shrewdly winked at her and spoke. How about we go ahead and put an end to this? You must be tired of seeing the same old performance, right? My leg. The instant she tried to advance, she tipped forward and had to put out her hands to stop her fall. Subaru stared in shock at this unbelievable screw-up, the reason for which was at her feet. Elsa's right foot was stuck to the frozen floor. The shattered ice had slowly piled up, and had now been used to trap her foot. It's not like I was just firing randomly, you know. So you've got me, is that right? Just think of it as the difference in experience. I believe this is worthy of some praise. Good night. As he threw his chest out, Puck's small body started to waver. He thrust his hands out in front him, a pose that suggested he was about to use a killer technique, and started gathering up the largest amount of magic thus far. Even Subaru could see it radiating from him. That magical power did not turn into ice, it was fired as pure destructive energy. The bluish-white light froze everything in its path, and dyed the loot house white in one fell swoop. The energy passed through Elsa and slammed into the entrance to the loot house, blowing away the poorly fitted door. The freezing waves left in the aftermath even reached outside. Once that magnificent light passed through, all that was left was frost. The goods, the furniture, the counter, everything was completely frozen. Naturally, anyone who took a direct hit would inevitably be turned into an ice sculpture. However, you're joking. I'm afraid not. Ah, splendid. I thought I was going to die. If she had taken it head on, perhaps. You're a girl, so I can't really praise that sort of thing. She had managed to avoid his last resort, but Puck wasn't any angrier than his words suggested. He truly was displeased by the act itself. Subaru could see blood dripping, and traces of steam coming off the frozen floor. The source of the blood was Elsa's right foot. She was standing barefoot just barely out of the path of Puck's attack, and a large amount of blood was pouring out of her right foot. It was only natural. After all, she had sliced off the sole of her foot. I was in such a hurry I almost chopped the whole thing off. That was a close one. But even that amount ought to be quite painful. Yes, I suppose you're correct. It is painful. Wonderful. I feel alive, now. In response to Puck's concerned words, Elsa nodded with an ecstatic look, and then raised her bleeding foot and pressed it against a nearby lump of ice with no hesitation. It sounded like the air was cracking. Elsa moaned seductively, after which she used her cookery knife to smooth the ice's surface. With that, she managed to stop the bleeding. She had recklessly attached a part of the ice to her sole. It's a little hard to move, but it's enough. Her ice shoe produced a stiff sound as she tested it against the ground. She then smiled even more cheerfully. The fact that she was so addicted to battle that she didn't even mind mutilating herself left Subaru speechless, but it left an even bigger impression on Puck and Not Sattler, who were facing her. Puck, can you continue? Sorry, I'm really sleepy. I underestimated her a bit. I used up too much mana, gonna disappear. When Puck responded to her murmur, his voice had for the first time lost its composure. The cat on her shoulder, by her silver hair, started to emit a faint glow and looked as though he could disappear at any moment. He was out of time. I'll handle this somehow, so get some rest for now. Thank you. Should anything happen to you, I'll act in accordance with the contract. If it comes down to it, ring your odd to draw me out. As if urged on by Not Sattler's tender voice, Puck's body suddenly scattered and vanished. Every single person in that room lamented his retreat, but the one who was most disappointed was. Ah, he's gone. How terribly unfortunate. Elsa, who had been fighting for her life. She once again readied her blade, and moved toward Not Sattler with high-pitched footsteps. In response, Not Sattler started forming icicles one after another, but she couldn't form nearly as many as Puck had. But considering Elsa's mobility had dropped, their chances of winning were probably still 50-50. We can't just stand around staring anymore. Rom gripped his club and readied himself. Perhaps he thought the situation looked bad. When Subaru silently looked at him, he shrugged his shoulders. We don't know if she can win without assistance. So if we just sit around and watch, we're just missing our chance, you understand, right, Felt? Yeah, I get it. Even if we choose to run, we've got to do it right now. Felt hadn't spoken a word since Elsa first made her threat. She stood next to Rom, who seemed ready to fight, and then suddenly turned to Subaru. About earlier, you kinda saved me. Ah, just a little, mind you. Also, don't call me a kid. Despite how I look, I'm actually 15. Probably around the same as you. I'm 18 this year. I can drive and get married. You don't look it. You look like a kid. You've gotta live a life that shows on your face more. On top of being a shut-in, he also lived a life without major ups and downs. But still, he felt that his current situation had way too many gigantic ups and downs. As the two resolved themselves and observed the state of the battle, all Subaru could do was watch. He was probably the weakest one there. And it wasn't merely fighting strength that he lacked. My legs are trembling, they won't move, I don't even have the resolve. It was more than a problem of being unqualified, he couldn't even get involved. Rom had his arms, Felt had her legs, and Sattler had her magic, they could use these to fight. However, Elsa's abnormality transcended all of these. Truly, she's getting overwhelmed. Rom's candid impression said it all. Not Sattler continued to fire an endless barrage of ice, but they were all smashed apart by Elsa's blade dance. Elsa sprang toward her, slashing as if she was dancing, and in response Not Sattler halted her attack to block with her ice shield and then froze the ground underneath her to slide away, barely avoiding the subsequent attacks. If she managed to gain some distance, she would once again go on the offensive with her ice barrage, but Elsa didn't seem like the kind of opponent who'd fall for the same trick twice. The next time she approached Natsuki Subaru would probably end up seeing a sight he never wanted to see again. Here goes. Probably imagining the same thing, Rom roared as he joined the battle. He raised his club and produced a powerful wind as he swung it. A bit of the hair on the back of Elsa's head got caught up in this as she ducked. Oh dear, it's rather boorish to cut in on a dance. If you wanna dance that bad, I'll make you dance the finest dance of all. Here, round and round. Rom thrust his spiked club at her, changing the scope of his attack from a line to a point. This sudden unconventional attack was aimed at Elsa's throat. In the end the result froze Rom's throat. What the hell? Because you're so strong, I can even do this. Elsa was on her tiptoes, standing on the tip of his club. There was a divinely inspired sense of balance to this disparity in power, the first time such acrobatics were performed. Before this miraculous balance could collapse, Elsa swung her blade horizontally. It was aimed at Rom's temple. The force was such that a direct hit would blow the top of his head off. As if I'd let you. Clang, a small knife was thrown into her blade's path, hitting it. The impact from directly below slightly disturbed the blade's movement, and the side of the blade slammed into his head, still retaining its speed. There was the dull sound of steel striking bone, and Rom's body collapsed to the side. Bad girl. Ah. Elsa landed casually, and turned her gaze toward Felt. Felt's small knife had saved Rom from a fatal slash. She had probably been aiming at Elsa's arm, but it seemed her haste threw off her aim. But it could also be said that this just barely saved Rom's life. You have neither the resolve nor the strength to fight. That being the case, you should have just cowered in the corner, making yourself small. With high-pitched footsteps, Elsa's dark figure seemed to be gliding as she instantly appeared before Felt. Rom was unconscious from the blow to his head, and since Natsuki had put some distance between them, she would not make it in time. Felt herself was paralyzed, like a frog in a snake's sights. Haydara. So the only one who could grab her small body and leap out of the way was the one who had been cowering in terror right next to her.
Super hit the ground, rolling with Felt in his arms as Elsa's blade sliced through the empty air where the girl had just stood. His breath came into ragged gasp as his heart hammering so loudly he thought it might burst from his chest. He hadn't planned to move. His body had just reacted.
Elsa turned toward him, her dark eyes gleaming with interest. Oh, so you do have a bit of courage in you after all. Her tongue traced her lips in a slow, deliberate motion. That was a good move. But now you're just in the way.
Subaru scrambled to his feet, pulling Felt up alongside with him. His entire body was trembling, the lingering fear still gripping his legs, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice to work. You know, I really hate pain, and I really don't want to die, but I can't just let you have your way.
Felt's grip tightened on her knife as she steadied herself beside him. You're not the only one with something to lose, dumbass. We're not done yet.
Elsa chuckled, a low and unsettling sound. Good, good. I do so love when my prey struggles.
A cold gust swept through the room, and the remnants of the frost still clinging to the walls cracked and fell. Natsuki was breathing heavily. Her hands raised as more ice began to form in front of her. She was gathering the magic she had left. Through it was obvious. She was nearing her limit. From the side, Rom groaned as he stared, his large hand pressing against his wooden head. His presence was reassuring, but he was still dazed, and getting back into the fight seemed unlikely for now. Subaru's mind raced. Running wasn't an option. Puck was gone, Rom was down, and Natsuki couldn't fight in at full strength. That meant only one thing. He had to stall. Taking a deep breath, Subaru stepped forward, putting himself between Elsa and the others. Hey, knife freak! How about a deal? His lips curved into a smirk, hiding the fact that he felt like puking. You like a good fight, right? Why not let us go and find someone who can give you a real challenge? You already prove you're a badass and no need to overdo it.
Elsa blinked, then threw her head back in laughter. Oh, that's adorable. You think you can talk your way out of this? She tilted her head. But you do amuse me. Perhaps I'll give you a head start before I carve you open.
A loud crack echoed through the room as Natstella sent a spear of ice toward Elsa, aiming for her exposed side. The assassin twisted, barely avoiding the strike as it shattered against the floor. Without missing a beat, Elsa lunged towards Natstella, her blade flashing. "No, you don't!" Subaru shouted, hurling himself forward and grabbing onto Elsa's arm. He felt her muscles tense, far stronger than he had expected. With a single flick of her wrist, she sent him flying, his body slamming into the frozen floor.
Pain exploded through him, his ribs burning from the impact. He gasped, vision blurring, but he forced himself up. "Gar, damn it, that's gonna leave a mark." Elsa sighed, rolling her shoulders. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." She raised her kukri knife, ready to strike the final blow. The morning sun broke through the shattered windows of the loot house, its golden rays creeping across the floor, casting long shadows as dawn arrived. One particular beam of light stretched towards Subaru, striking him as he struggled to push himself up from the icy floor. Warmth surged through his battered body, chasing away the pain and exhaustion. His breath hitched. His heartbeat slowed, steadying. Something inside him stirred, a force unfamiliar yet undeniably powerful. Across the room, Elsa had pinned the silver-haired girl to the ground, her kukri knife poised over her chest. A cruel smile curved Elsa's lips as she relished the moment. "It's over, little girl," she whispered, pressing the blade downward. Then, before the knife could descend, a massive hand caught Elsa's wrist in an iron grip. The assassin's eyes widened slightly before a delighted grin spread across her face. "Oh, now this is exciting." The hand belonged to Subaru, but not the frail, trembling boy from before. His body had transformed, muscles swelling beneath his torn jacket, his presence radiating an aura of absolute pride and dominance. His usual slouched posture was gone, replaced by a regal stance. His golden eyes burned with a fierce arrogance, as though the very world belonged to him. Elsa attempted to yank her arm free, but Subaru's grip was unyielding. It wasn't just strength. It was an absolute authority that refused to be denied. Instead of fear, Elsa's grin only widened, her excitement palpable. My, you're full of surprises." The silver-haired girl gasped, staring up at him. Who?" she murmured, confusion and awe mingling in her voice. She didn't know his name. Felt, still gripping her knife, could only gape. "What the hell happened to you?" Rom, now more alert, let out a deep chuckle, rubbing his aching head. "Oh, now that's something you don't see every day." Subaru turned his attention back to Elsa, his lips curling into a smirk, one filled with unmistakable arrogance. "You looked a lot scarier a few minutes ago," he taunted, effortlessly tightening his grip. Elsa's wrist cracked slightly, but instead of wincing, she let out a breathy laugh. This is exquisite," Elsa purred. "Do you think you can break me, little king?" Subaru's smirk only widened. The sunlight, the warmth, the power surging through him. He didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. He had the advantage, and that was all that mattered. "Sorry, knife freak," Subaru said, lifting her off the ground with ease. "But I don't think I know." And with that, he hurled Elsa across the room, her body smashing into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. She groaned, rolling onto her side, only to burst into delighted laughter. He, this just got interesting." Subaru cracked his knuckles, stepping forward with an air of supreme confidence. "Oh, trust me," he said, rolling his shoulders. "I'm just getting started." The room trembled as Subaru took another step forward, the golden glow radiating from his body intensifying. The shattered glass on the floor reflected the brilliance of his aura, making it seem as if dawn itself had descended into the loot house. Elsa pushed herself up from the rubble, her eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. She wiped a trickle of blood from her lips with the back of her hand, grinning. "You're something else, little king. But let's see how long you can shine before you burn out." Subaru tilted his head, amusement dancing in his sunlit irises. He lifted a hand, fingers curling into a fist, and the air around him shimmered with raw heat. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice carried a weight of absolute certainty. The sun doesn't burn out, it rises. Always. Without warning, Elsa lunged, her kukri knife slicing through the air in a deadly arc. But the moment the blade neared Subaru's skin, a searing light flared around him, melting the weapon mid-swing. Elsa barely had time to register the shock before Subaru struck. His fist, wreathed in golden fire, connected with her midsection, sending her rocketing backward. She crashed through the wooden walls of the loot house, bursting into the street outside in a cloud of dust and debris. A stunned silence followed. Felt, still gripping her knife, gawked. Rom whistled lowly. The silver-haired girl, not Satella, covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Subaru walked forward, stepping through the hole in the wall, his very presence warping the air around him. The morning sun burned brighter, as if responding to his newfound might. Outside, Elsa pulled herself from the wreckage, her body battered but her smile still firmly in place. He, yes. More. Show me more. Her wounds began to knit together unnaturally fast, and in a blur, she vanished, only to reappear behind Subaru, her remaining blade flashing toward his neck. But Subaru didn't move. He didn't have to. The instant the knife should have connected, Elsa let out a sharp gasp. Her entire arm refused to move, locked in place. The sunlight around Subaru intensified, bending reality itself, exerting an overwhelming force. He turned his head slightly, golden eyes locking onto hers. You don't get it, do you? The closer you get to the sun, his voice dropped to a near whisper, but the sheer authority behind it sent a chill down Elsa's spine. The more it burns. A blinding explosion of heat erupted from Subaru, sending Elsa spiraling back with a scream. Her flesh sizzled where the light had touched her, the inhuman regeneration struggling to keep up. Subaru exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if he were merely warming up. He clenched his fists, and the very air around him crackled with radiant energy. Now, then, he said, stepping toward her. Let's see how long you can last against the sun. Elsa staggered to her feet, her breath ragged yet her grin unfaltering. Her charred skin twitched, the regeneration struggling against the divine heat scorching her flesh. For the first time in her life, she felt it, true, inescapable destruction, and yet, her eyes gleamed with unrestrained hunger. Yes, she rasped, licking her lips despite the pain. This is it. This is what I've been waiting for. With a frenzied burst of speed, she lunged again, her form a blur as she struck from multiple angles at once. The world became a storm of silver as her kukri sliced through the air with lethal precision. But Subaru did not falter. Each strike that neared him dissolved into golden embers, the sheer radiance of his presence denying her attacks before they could reach him. It was as if the universe itself rejected her violence. Elsa's expression twisted in frustration as she darted back, crouching low. TCH. You're not just some prey anymore. Subaru lifted a hand, and the air around him warped, rippling outward like heat waves over a blazing desert. And you're not a hunter anymore, he said, voice heavy with finality. You're just a moth flying into the flame. The light around him surged, flaring outward in a radiant explosion. The very ground trembled beneath the force. Elsa reacted instantly, her instincts screaming at her to move. But it was too late. A golden arc of pure energy slashed across the battlefield, striking her square in the chest. Her body convulsed as searing agony overtook her senses. She let out a ragged gasp, her limbs locking up, the air itself seeming to betray her escape. Subaru clenched his fist, and the glow around him intensified further. No more games, he declared. This ends now. He vanished. No, he moved so fast that it seemed like he vanished. A fraction of a second later, he reappeared behind Elsa, his fist already driving into her back. The impact sent her rocketing into the sky, the sheer force parting the clouds as she soared uncontrollably. Subaru didn't stop. He bent his knees and launched himself after her, golden fire trailing behind him like the tail of a comet. The moment he caught up, his palm pressed against her stomach, and suddenly, all movement ceased. Elsa's breath hitched. She could feel it. A force so overwhelming it left no room for resistance. Subaru met her gaze, his golden eyes burning like miniature suns. This is where your hunt ends. The next instant, an explosion of radiant energy engulfed them both. A blinding pillar of light erupted from the sky, illuminating the entire city with the brilliance of a newborn star. The heat was unbearable, even from miles away. For a moment, it was as if another sun had been born over Lugnitsa. When the light finally faded, Subaru stood alone, hovering in the sky. Elsa was gone. No ashes, no body, just empty space where she had once been. The ultimate hunter, erased without a trace. Slowly, Subaru descended, landing softly amidst the stunned silence of his companions. The air shimmered around him, his aura beginning to fade, the divine glow retreating into his form. Felt gulped, still gripping her knife. Oi, what was that? Rom exhaled deeply, shaking his head. A miracle. Not Satella took a hesitant step forward, eyes filled with awe and uncertainty. What are you? Subaru turned to her, the last embers of his golden light flickering in his gaze. He offered a small, exhausted smile. Just a guy who got tired of losing. And with that, his knees buckled, his vision blurred, his body finally feeling the weight of what he had unleashed. But before he could hit the ground, soft hands caught him, and the last thing he saw before slipping into unconsciousness was Amelia's worried, beautiful face. The sun had risen, and with it, a new legend was born. Elsa was gone. No ashes, no remnants, just an empty void where she had once stood. The sheer brilliance of Subaru's final attack had erased her utterly, leaving nothing behind but the lingering heat of his power. As the golden light around him dimmed, Subaru exhaled sharply, his body swaying. The divine might coursing through him had done its work, but now, it was fading, leaving behind only exhaustion. A stunned silence filled the ruined street. Felt gripped her stolen insignia tightly, her wide crimson eyes flicking between Subaru and the scorched battlefield. The hell, what even are you? Rom let out a low whistle, rubbing the back of his bald head. Ain't never seen anything like that in all my years. But Subaru barely heard them. His golden gaze, now flickering between brilliance and fatigue, turned toward the silver-haired girl, the one who had started all of this, the one he had sworn to protect. She stood frozen, violet eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had seen magic, had witnessed incredible feats before, but this was beyond reason. Subaru chuckled weakly, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess I went a little overboard, huh? His legs wobbled. The girl rushed forward on instinct, catching his arm before he could collapse. Hey. You, why? She swallowed, trying to find the right words. You don't even know me. Why did you go that far? Subaru blinked at her, surprised by the question. Even now, with his strength nearly gone, he still found himself staring at her, searching for something, an answer, maybe, to a question he didn't fully understand. After a moment, he smirked tiredly. Dunno. Just had a feeling you were worth saving. She flinched, eyes searching his face. His expression was open, raw, completely sincere. It made her chest tighten with something unfamiliar. Felt snorted from the sidelines. TCH. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, well, Subaru muttered, voice growing fainter. I'm a pretty dumb guy. His vision blurred, his body finally succumbing to exhaustion. As darkness crept in, he managed one last thought before everything faded. Not Satella. I guess I'll have to ask her real name next time. Then, everything went black. The silver-haired girl, still holding onto him, stared at his unconscious form, her grip tightening slightly. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he had risked everything for her. But for some reason, she wanted to. For Subaru, waking up felt nothing like shaking off a bad night's sleep. As he opened his eyes, he was met with a dim, artificial glow. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar, adorned with crystals that emitted a faint light, casting a soft glow throughout the room. Subaru had always been good at waking up. The moment his eyes opened, he was instantly alert. The pillow feels different. Rolling onto his side, he immediately noticed the unfamiliar sensation beneath his head. The softness of the bed was far beyond what his usual futon could offer. In fact, his old futon had left a permanent discoloration on the floor because he never bothered to fold it up after waking. And it smells way too nice, too. Ha ha ha, smells like, ha. Subaru paused mid-thought, narrowing his eyes. For some reason, he could feel something radiating from himself. A kind of overwhelming, almost divine warmth that made his whole body tingle. It wasn't just comforting, it was powerful. What the hell is this? Some kind of celestial radiance, or dawn's wrath? He had no idea what was causing it, but it felt right. Like a force deep within him was stirring, waiting to be unleashed. Shaking off the thought, he sat up and took in his surroundings. The room was undoubtedly built for someone of high status. The bed alone was large enough for at least 5 people, and the room itself had to be at least 350 square feet, an absurd amount of space to dedicate to just sleeping. Then again, considering the size of the mansion, maybe it wasn't so unusual. Now fully awake, Subaru swung his legs off the bed and did a quick self-assessment. He rolled his shoulders, flexed his joints, stretched his arms and legs, and even did a few squats to check his endurance. Slightly out of breath, he lifted his shirt to inspect his torso. The stomach wound is gone. No bruises, no scars, no stitches. The doctors in this world must be top-notch. Fantastic. Can't have unsightly scars ruining my appeal, after all. Household chores like cooking, laundry, and sewing weren't exactly Subaru's forte, but if nothing else, he had potential. He was physically resilient, thanks to years of casual home workouts, and his appetite was equally impressive. Maybe I could charm my way into the life of a rich noble or minister. He immediately shook his head. Yeah, no, not happening. Shifting his focus, he took in his surroundings again. Aside from the bed, the room was relatively simple. There was a potted plant by the window, a few pieces of furniture, and paintings decorating the walls. One thing was missing, though. Subaru glanced around, frowning. No clock, no calendar. Does this world even have those? He rubbed his chin, relying on a technique he had perfected over time, his trusty stubble clock. Judging by the feel of his facial hair, about 5 or 6 hours had passed since he last checked. That meant it was likely the end of his first full day in this world. Thinking that far, Subaru instinctively touched his stomach again. So, does that mean I avoided triggering return by death this time? That was the thought he had been trying to avoid since waking up, but there was no point in denying it. He needed to face reality. He ran through his previous deaths in his mind. First time, I died like an idiot. Second time, I died heroically. Third time, I died like a stray dog. And fourth time, I got caught in a crossfire and died as collateral damage. If I had actually died again, I'd be well on my way to being a nameless background character. All of his deaths were equally ridiculous in their own ways. Sitting cross-legged on the oversized bed, the sheets and comforter haphazardly tossed aside, Subaru fell into deep thought, unaware that within him, Dawn's wrath continued to stir. There was no doubt about it, this wasn't the site of his usual restart point. Somehow, he had avoided triggering return by death. There was a 1 in 10,000 chance that he had ended up in the home of the fruit stall owner, where he always restarted before, but Subaru dismissed that thought immediately. No, this mansion could only belong to one of two people. It's either Reinhard's place or Amelia Tan's house. They were the only two people who had been kind to him, and both seemed like the type to own a massive estate. Please be Amelia's, Subaru thought, indulging in a bit of wishful thinking. The treatment of his abdominal wound was most likely thanks to Amelia's magic. If she hadn't healed him immediately, he would have died on the spot. And besides, as a guy, he wanted to believe that it was a beautiful girl who had saved him. It's not like I'd complain about that handsome knight patching me up, but come on, any guy would prefer to be healed by a gorgeous girl, right? This is a fantasy world, after all. He trailed his fingers along the bedsheets, momentarily adopting a delicate, feminine posture as he daydreamed. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he bounced on the bed and used the momentum to land on the floor. For now, priority number 1, figure out where the hell I am. He struck a pose, and thus begins a grand new adventure. Then he stopped. No, cut that out, me. Don't freak out just because things have changed. Get back on track. Or what? Are you really gonna revert to those reclusive days? The days when you were just a lazy shut-in who refused to do anything? Are you gonna fall back into the routine of eating, gaming, watching anime, sleeping whenever you want, aimlessly browsing the internet, and occasionally posting dumb comments online? Actually, wait. That sounds amazing. It wasn't like Subaru had wanted to be summoned to another world. He hadn't been dissatisfied with his life in the first place. Sleeping in as much as he wanted. That was the dream. I mean, sure, I feel a little bad for my parents, but they never really got in my way. They just let me do whatever. Subaru exercised, ate meals with his family, went out sometimes, and even asked for an allowance. By all accounts, his life had been pretty normal. Aside from not going to school. Maybe dropout was a more accurate label than shut-in. What a shocking revelation. If I hadn't come to another world, I probably would have kept calling myself a shut-in without realizing that wasn't actually true. No way, was that the whole reason I was summoned here. He made a mental note to be more careful about self-labeling in the future. Wouldn't want to anger the World Shut-In Association, if such a thing even existed. Wait, but if they're all shut-ins, how would they even organize a meeting? As his thoughts spiraled into nonsense, Subaru shook his head and dismissed the entire train of thought. It doesn't even matter. With that, he crept toward the door. Ideally, someone would come check on him while he was still in bed. Maybe someone who could actually explain the situation to him. Or, better yet, Subaru's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. I wake up to hear, "Are you awake?" from a beautiful girl who sat by my bedside, nursing me back to health. That's the normal setup, right? If you get a sec-eyed and the girl who summoned you isn't waiting beside you, something went horribly wrong. Well, if nothing else, at least the common trope of fantasy worlds being full of beautiful people seemed to be holding true. That much was obvious from the limited cast of characters he had met so far. The 3 thugs weren't worth counting. The wrinkled old merchant was out. That left felt has potential if she cleaned up a bit. Then there's Amelia Tan, of course, and Reinhard, and Elsa. The moment her name crossed his mind, his fingertips trembled. Oh hell no, his trauma gauge skyrocketed, and he immediately excluded her from the list. Sure, technically she's hot, but when you add in her whole, murder-happy, disembowelment-obsessed thing, yeah, no thanks. That's some twisted gap mo, and I am not signing up for that. Shaking off the chills, Subaru took a deep breath. Alright. No more stalling. Time to stop procrastinating and get moving. Starting a new adventure is always exciting. With that, he grabbed the doorknob, turned it carefully, and pushed the door open. A wave of chilly air rushed in, brushing against his bare feet. Subaru shivered, letting out an involuntary wah. Somewhere deep inside him, the mysterious warmth, the radiant dawn, the celestial incandescence, or whatever over-the-top name he'd eventually settle on, continued to stir. The slums of Luganica had long been a place of shadows, where blood spilled unnoticed, and the cries of the weak were swallowed by the walls of decay. Fights, ambushes, and killings were nothing new here. It was a cycle that had played out countless times. But this time was different. Reinhard van Estrie stood at the threshold of a silent battlefield, the distant echoes of panicked citizens fading into the morning air. He had been summoned by reports of a disturbance, clashes of steel, screams cut short, and an unnatural stillness that followed. Now, as he stepped forward, the rising sun cast its golden glow through the ruined entrance of the loot house, illuminating a scene unlike any he had ever witnessed. 4 figures stood, or rather, remained, at the heart of it all. Lady Amelia was kneeling, holding someone in her arms. A boy, bloodied, unconscious, his clothing torn and dirtied. His face was eerily familiar. The same boy from the alleyway, the one who had called out to Amelia for help. The dim rays of dawn poured in from the shattered ceiling, painting the dust-filled air in warm hues. Yet, among the debris, a more intense light seemed to linger, an unnatural glow, almost as if the very sun itself had touched this forsaken place. Reinhard's eyes sharpened, scanning the battlefield with the instincts of a seasoned knight. To the side, slumped against the wall, was a girl with wild blonde hair. She was panting, gripping her side, staring at the unconscious boy in shock and confusion, as if she couldn't believe what had happened. Near the doorway lay a crumpled figure, motionless in a pool of crimson. The scent of blood was thick, unmistakable. And then, at the center of it all, Reinhard's gaze settled on the scattered weapons, the obsidian-colored daggers of the Bowl Hunter. Their edges gleamed faintly in the morning light, now nothing more than discarded fangs without their master. Elsa. He murmured the name without emotion. He had fought her before, crossed blades with her in the past, yet she had always slipped away, a shadow vanishing into the night. She was a predator, one who carved fear into those she hunted. And yet, here she lay, not just defeated, but utterly erased. Ashes and remnants were all that remained. By whom? Reinhard's eyes shifted toward the unconscious boy. Subaru, just what are you? He looked frail, certainly not the type to challenge a monster like Elsa, but even as he lay there, weak and battered, something about him seemed unnatural. The light from the sun struck his figure directly, yet it did not simply illuminate him. It seemed to be drawn to him, radiating outward in soft waves. It was not magic, not something cast by another. This was something intrinsic. Something born from within. Reinhard narrowed his eyes. A warmth touched his skin, not from the sunrise itself but from the space around the boy, something reminiscent of an overwhelming power lying dormant beneath the surface. This wasn't normal. Even the slums, steeped in their history of violence, had never seen this. Reinhard took a slow step forward, his gaze locked onto the unconscious boy. "Who are you?" he muttered under his breath. It was not a question meant to be answered immediately, but deep within, the Sword Saint had the creeping suspicion that this was only the beginning. That this boy, wrapped in the light of dawn, was more than just a lost soul caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The silence between them was broken as Reinhard stepped closer, his keen eyes sweeping over the scene before settling on Lady Amelia. What happened here? His voice was calm, steady, yet carried the weight of undeniable authority. Lady Amelia, still kneeling beside Subaru, looked up, her violet eyes widening slightly in surprise. The Sword Saint, here, in the slums. Sir Reinhard, she muttered, almost in disbelief. The idea of someone as esteemed as Reinhard van Estrie being in a place like this was unthinkable. The slums were far removed from nobility, from knights of honor, from anything resembling the grandeur he embodied. Reinhard, reading the hesitation in her gaze, offered a reassuring smile. I was called here, he explained simply. There was a disturbance, a battle in the slums. The citizens were alarmed and reached out to the guards. But more than that. His eyes flickered towards Subaru. He called for my help. Lady Amelia's lips parted slightly, surprise overtaking her expression. Subaru, he did. How? When? He had been barely holding on. How could he have possibly called out to Reinhard? And more than that, why did Sir Reinhard hear him? Seeing her confusion, Lady Amelia quickly shook her head and bowed lightly. I apologize for troubling you with this, Sir Reinhard. You shouldn't have to be here. It was not my intention to inconvenience you by. There is no need to apologize, Lady Amelia, Reinhard interjected gently. This is my duty. Scouting, protecting the kingdom, and assisting where I am needed, that is what a knight must do. His smile remained warm, unwavering. Besides, I am simply glad I arrived in time. Despite the tension lingering in the air, Lady Amelia felt a small weight lift from her chest at his words. Even in a place as wretched as the slums, Sir Reinhard remained the ever-kind, ever-reliable knight she had always known him to be. However, Reinhard was not one to let distractions linger. His expression turned serious once more. Lady Amelia, please, tell me what happened here. Lady Amelia took a deep breath before nodding. We were fighting against the Bowel Hunter for some time, and we were growing tired. Even with Puck's assistance, I was struggling to keep up with her speed. Her hands clenched slightly at the memory. I was running out of magic, and when that happened, I was pinned. A shudder ran down her spine as she recalled the gleam of Elsa's dagger poised to carve into her flesh. I thought it was over, she admitted, her voice quieter, but then. She hesitated, her face heating up slightly. The radiance of the sun hit me. Reinhard's brows furrowed slightly. Lady Amelia's gaze drifted down towards Subaru, still unconscious. A hand stopped her blade, she continued, her voice distant, as if replaying the moment in her mind. A stranger, covered in light. His voice was deep, overwhelming. A small blush dusted her cheeks, and she suddenly stopped herself, pressing her lips together. She shook her head quickly, flustered. I do not know how to explain it, she said hastily. Reinhard listened intently, his blue eyes narrowing slightly. A radiance of the sun. A figure bathed in light. His gaze drifted once more to Subaru, lying unconscious, as if lost in a dream. The warmth in the air, the faint, lingering presence, it had not been imagined. Reinhard inhaled deeply, standing to his full height. I see, he murmured. What exactly are you, Subaru Natsuki, present time? The hallway stretched out before Subaru, painted in warm, inviting colors. On either side, evenly spaced doors lined the corridor, each likely leading to rooms similar to the one he had woken up in. With this many 350 square foot rooms, this place is way more luxurious than I thought. Clearing his throat, Subaru took in the sheer scale of the mansion. The only thing I can say is, wow, it's ridiculously spacious. But with all this room, where is everyone? His bare feet met the smooth, polished floors, so pristine that they reminded him of his school hallways. Yet, unlike a bustling campus, this place was eerily silent. This is even quieter than my room, too quiet, actually. Like, horror movie levels of quiet. Normally, he would have thrown caution to the wind and shouted, is anyone here? But something about the atmosphere made him hesitate. At this point, he had no real grasp of his situation. He assumed he was in the home of a benefactor, but there was always the other possibility. What if Elsa had miraculously survived, gathered a small army, no, a massive army of 100,000 bloodthirsty mercenaries, and captured him in his sleep? That would turn this from a kind noble's mansion into the hideout of an assassin syndicate. Okay, maybe I should just go back to my room, kneel on the bed, and start praying to whatever gods exist in this world. Despite his nervous joking, his eyes wandered to the decorations along the hallway. The paintings in the corridor were far different from the landscapes in his room, quirky, abstract, and almost unsettling. Subaru furrowed his brows at one, pretending to analyze the brushstrokes like some self-important art critic. The artist's bold strokes truly encapsulate the fleeting nature of existence, he mused sarcastically before shaking his head. Focus. I already decided on a course of action, didn't I? Subaru muttered to himself, pushing aside the option of retreat. I mean, I don't remember making a dramatic oath or anything, but let's just pretend I did. With that, he pressed forward, determined to find someone, anyone, who could tell him where he was. Right or left? With barely a second thought, Subaru turned right. Left always has traps. That's just common sense, he nodded to himself, recalling a manga he'd read where a villain ominously chuckled, there are many traps on the left, he he he. Of course, that logic only worked if the mansion followed manga tropes. After several minutes of walking, a realization hit him. Everything looked exactly the same. The endless doors, the identical paintings, the same pristine floor, it all blended together into an unchanging, repetitive loop. Oh well. I still haven't run into anyone, and I still don't see a way out. He glanced back, then forward. Wait a second, he hadn't even reached the end of the hallway. Worse yet, there wasn't a single branching path, just an unbroken corridor stretching far beyond where his common sense told him it should end. A minute or two of walking shouldn't have felt like much, but the distance he had covered, easily over 1,000 feet. Subaru exhaled sharply, his brows furrowing. Okay, now this is getting weird. It wasn't normal for a hallway to stretch on for 1,000 feet without an end in sight. I'm not going to get anywhere like this, Subaru muttered, scratching his head in frustration. The worst case scenario was that he'd have to go back to the room he'd come from, but that was a last resort. Huh? Subaru paused, his neck craning in confusion. He glanced over his shoulder, but the hallway behind him stretched on just as endlessly as the one ahead. Wait a minute. Didn't I already see this painting when I first left the room? He could have sworn he'd noticed the artwork earlier, mocking its brushwork. Maybe it was possible to find the same piece of art in different parts of the hallway, but that felt wrong. It didn't make sense to have the same display in each section. In other words, to put it bluntly, I'm stuck in an infinite loop. Maybe he hadn't moved far enough yet, or perhaps some trickery in the mansion was at play, like a moving floor or some other mechanism he hadn't noticed. If it's one of those moving floor things, that's seriously going to ruin the vibe of the whole ancient mansion aesthetic, Subaru grumbled. But hey, since return by death is a thing now, maybe I'm just used to these endless loops. Muttering to himself, he opened the nearest door. Inside was a simple 350 square foot room, familiar, with a bed and basic furniture, just like the one he'd woken up in. What the heck does this mean? Is it telling me I can't move? I'm supposed to just stay here? It felt like a way to trap him in place, perhaps a tactic to drain his will, forcing him into submission by showing him just how insignificant his attempts at resistance were. Well, now that I know what this is, I have to admit, it's a pretty clever way to wear me down. If I were any other person, I'd probably be losing it right about now. Subaru stretched his arms and legs with a sigh, loosening his muscles as he prepared to take action. My usual response would be to just curl up in bed, wait for someone to come by, and see what happens, but not this time. If they think this is enough to make me give up, they've got another thing coming. With renewed determination, he crouched in the hallway, taking a starting position as if preparing for a race. Get set, ready. After sleeping for half a day, I'm feeling totally recharged. He said it with confidence, even though his stamina wasn't particularly impressive. He wasn't as fast as felt, and frankly, even old man Rom might give him a run for his money. His 100-meter dash was so disappointing that he'd be winded by the 70-meter mark, but right now, he felt like he could sprint like an Olympic athlete. He started running, telling himself to push forward, each stride accompanied by the internal mantra, run, run, run. But the end of the hallway never came into view. No matter how far he ran, he found himself back at the starting point. It was as if the hallway was mocking his determination, repeating the message, resistance is futile. Yet Subaru didn't stop. It was his way of showing the world that sometimes, even if the odds were stacked against him, the only thing an ordinary man could do was keep running, again and again. Subaru didn't care if the hallway was just a forgotten, unused part of the mansion, or that it was someone else's home, or that he had only just been disemboweled half a day ago. In fact, he didn't even care that he urgently needed to relieve himself. No, wait, scratch that. That last one is really bad, Subaru groaned. I've got a raging urge to pee, and number 1 and number 2 both want to come out at the same time. Subaru's internal crisis reached a boiling point. The confident sprinting form of an Olympic athlete from earlier was now replaced by a much more frantic, desperate run. His legs squeezed together in a panicked attempt to hold everything in, his upper body swaying in a way that looked less like running and more like someone doing the worst version of a woman's jog. Yet, the hallway, unyielding and uncaring, only mocked him further. The more he ran, the more it felt like the world itself was playing a cruel game with him. His speed slowed, his body heaving with exhaustion as frustration mounted. His breath became erratic, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Sweat gathered on his forehead, and after a few more pained steps, Subaru could take no more. With a grunt, he crouched down and, in a moment of sheer resignation, muttered, I give up. I'm just doing it here. It was as if every shred of dignity he had as a human being was slipping away. Being unable to find a proper bathroom made him feel no different than a wild animal, no better than a dog or a cat. But Subaru, ever stubborn, refused to let this break him. This is ridiculous, but there's something oddly satisfying about this, right? I'm discovering a new kink or something. This kind of abuse feels oddly good. Subaru's face twisted into an unexpected smile as he squatted there, the first true smile he'd worn since being transported to this world. He might have lost all sense of dignity, but at least he found a bit of peace in his circumstances. At least he still had enough presence of mind to realize that he hadn't completely lost his reason. He looked down at his situation, thinking of his next move. Natsuki Subaru, ready to G. Before he could finish his line, the world in front of him suddenly changed. The hallway, which had been a consistent loop no matter how much he ran, now warped in front of his eyes. The walls rippled, like crumpling a piece of paper and then smoothing it back out. Subaru blinked a few times, his body tensing, unsure whether he was seeing things. But as the ripples of the world faded, he stood up quickly, the urgent need to pee now momentarily forgotten. I don't really get what just happened, but is everything okay now? Subaru muttered, looking around. To his surprise, the hallway had transformed. The end was now visible, and several paths branched off, including the familiar one that led back to the room he had woken up in. The abstract painting he'd seen earlier was in front of him again, this time clearly marking the end of his endless loop. He realized, with no small amount of disbelief, that he had broken free from the endless cycle. He couldn't be certain why it had happened, but, so, basically, trying to pee in the hallway was the key to breaking the loop. That's a complicated flag. I never have figured that out. Whoever designed this trap must be an evil genius. Subaru scratched his head, trying to make sense of it all. Well, now that I've escaped the loop, why don't I just head back to the room and crash? He turned back toward the door, ready to call it a day and finally get some rest. But as soon as he did, a chill ran down his spine, a subtle sensation in the air that seemed to be saying, no, not yet. It wasn't like he heard any words, but the feeling was unmistakable. Someone, somewhere, was facepalming in disappointment at his antics. Whoever's out there, I get it. You want me to go back, right? Fine, I'll go. Subaru yelled, shaking his fist in frustration, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. He could have easily just stayed where he was, but he knew that wouldn't advance anything. Finding a bathroom was the top priority now, even if it meant walking through whatever strange atmosphere had enveloped the hallway. It's all for the sake of protecting my dignity, even if whoever designed this is too good at their job. With a huff of determination, Subaru gritted his teeth. I'm not backing down. Despite the loop being broken, the hallway still felt off, like there was something more beneath the surface. It was as if the air was thick with magic, far more powerful than anything Subaru had felt before. The sensation was similar to what he felt when Amelia used her magic, though this wasn't hidden. It was out in the open, confident, almost daring him to proceed. Subaru frowned, knowing there was no other option but to push forward. They say it's not safe to proceed in the dark, but being too cautious is the same as being a coward. And honestly, I've got a time limit. The strange atmosphere around him remained, subtle but unmistakable. It felt like a wave had receded, but Subaru knew it wouldn't be long before it crashed down on him again. Whatever the magic was, it wasn't done with him yet. Gulping and wiping the sweat from his forehead, Subaru took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knew that this hallway was still full of traps after breaking the loop. But, as strange as it sounded, his instincts told him that the first door was often the best choice in situations like this, just like in typical dungeon events. With a quick twist of the doorknob, he opened it, only to be met with an unexpected response. What a deeply bothersome guy, I suppose. Subaru froze, blinking in surprise. Before him stood a curly-haired little girl, her eyes narrowed in a mix of annoyance and judgment. The unfamiliar setting, a vast, quiet library, seemed to add an air of mystery to the moment. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this.